Welcome everyone to the cloud security episode of DZone Live. We've got a great all-star panel today for you. We've got Matt Johnson from Bridge Crew, Chen from Palo Alto Networks, and Boris Zaikin from Nordcloud, who will be joining us here in just a second. Also, if you're in the chat, let us know where you're from. We'll be engaging. So if you got topics you want to see us address or questions you want us to ask our panel, definitely throw those in. And so I am Blake, the community manager over at DZone. I got this cool DZone shirt today. So I think I got a few left, so you can always ping me there. Obviously, the sizes are a little bit running low on different type for sure. But we've got a great episode going today. We just launched a new app security trend report. I'll put that into the chat, so definitely go out and check out the new application security trend report. So very good, almost a tongue twister. So without further ado, hope everybody's doing great around the world in the land of DZone. Let's get going with our panel today. So I'm going to bring them all up to the stage. We're going to make it fun and exciting today. None of that boring stuff. We are live. We are authentic. There's no teleprompters here today. We are going to keep you awake, throw your coffee away. And here we got our panel. So Matt, kick it off. Tell everyone a little bit about you.
Hey everyone, Matt Johnson. I'm a developer advocate with Bridge Crew, now with Prisma Cloud. Our products basically allow you to shift left all of your infrastructure as code security, be it open source and SaaS products. So we are all about making sure your Terraform, your Kubernetes, your Helm manifests are secure right from that first commit, right from that first line in VS Code, by kind of comparing your infrastructure as code against kind of CIS guidelines and automatic checks for misconfigured issues.
Excellent. And Jay, tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Jay. I am a security researcher with Prisma Cloud and Unit 42, the threat intelligence research team of Palo Alto Networks. And I am a cloud native technology enthusiast, and my research has been focusing on identifying the threat and security issues related to cloud native platforms such as Docker, Kubernetes, and various cloud service providers.
Excellent. Great to have you here, Jay. And last but not least, our friend over in Germany, Boris from Nordcloud. Boris, tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Boris Zaikin, and I'm software and cloud architect in Nordcloud, an IBM company. So I'm the experience in the designing and developing software and cloud architecture based on Azure, Google Cloud, and AWS Cloud. To have an experience in the building the distributed system and frameworks, also based on Kubernetes and Service Fabric. Also, my key of areas is enterprise cloud solution, edge computing, high load application, and distributed systems.
Great. Well, you can definitely see for the audience out there why we got this great panel put together to talk about cloud security today. So if you've got questions or topics you want to see us address, anything pressing, put that into the chat. We'll be sure to address it. At the very end of this, we will also take Q&A questions from the audience. So everyone's doing great today. And let's get going with our very first topic, right? So our first topic that we're going to talk about today: does Kubernetes require more security than traditional environments?
I'm going to jump in on this one. I am so used to having the whole Kubernetes is hard conversation, and I think one of the things that kind of comes out of that Kubernetes is hard conversation is but look at all these things I have to do with security. Look at all these products and kind of extra services that I have to run in my cluster to, think about security. When it comes to Kubernetes, from streaming logs to visualizing to alerting on things to making sure my my network rules are okay, to making sure my policies and all that kind of stuff. And then the deployments themselves, there's so many pieces of configuration that need to be put into a deployment or a daemon set to kind of pass a load of the CIS guidelines for Kubernetes, for example. And I disagree that means that, Kubernetes requires more security. I think it's actually the opposite. I think it's that with Kubernetes, you have the visibility into what does need securing. I think that's the difference. We have this rich set of APIs. You can see everything that you are expecting. You can see everything that goes into a deployment. I don't think we've really had that before with traditional infrastructure. Like, who really knew the security posture of traditional infrastructure? There were bits that were probably manually created. There were bits that were probably there from legacy. There were maybe some bits on-prem where no one's touched that server in about 60 years. With Kubernetes, yes, there's a lot to think about, but that's all stuff we should have been thinking about with our traditional environments anyway. It was just harder to visualize. So I think we're actually in a much better situation with, our Kubernetes cluster being created maybe with Terraform or CloudFormation. So we have infrastructure as code, we can save that in Git, we have a history, we can kind of security scan that for misconfigurations, then into the Kubernetes APIs itself, into those manifests, we can scan those. Don't think it's more complex, actually think it's easier, but there's definitely a learning curve there. And the initial amount of learning might be a little bit intimidating.
Yes, I 100% agree with Matt. I think Kubernetes shouldn't require more security than traditional environment. I mean, I think it requires a different set of mindset and security measurement to operate a Kubernetes infrastructure securely. But typically, we look at Kubernetes in two different planes: data plane and control plane. For the data plane, for a user who only use data plane, that's pretty much the same. You deploy application and you focus on patching your application, make sure your application is not vulnerable or exposed to the internet insecurely. So that's pretty much stay the same. But the control plane, Kubernetes itself is very different from the traditional environment. You just need to learn the new security measurement to secure your Kubernetes control plane, such as don't expose your API server, don't expose your Kubernetes, don't expose etcd to the internet. That's how you secure your Kubernetes. And I agree with Matt. I don't think we require more security to protect Kubernetes.
I think I have a little bit a different opinion about, but still I agree with you guys. But still, there are a lot of vulnerabilities that are known that, for example, from our customers and worldwide, that that wrong configured clusters is like can be really vulnerable. So, for example, when some people use just not checking the Docker containers, and they given it root rights, and then the whole cluster is getting down just of the small container in some, even not the main container, but the container of your reference, of one of your reference of your application. So still you have to apply some additional security tools and security checks on your Kubernetes environment. You need to get into all your cluster, understand clearly how everything is working, not use default a setup and so on. So it's really huge topic. So
excellent. So that's our first topic done. And once again, if you're just joining us, we've got Matt, we've got Jay, we've got Boris, a global panel with us today. If you got questions throughout, what are your cloud security questions? You can throw those into chat. We'll be sure to do them. And since we have you all here, is there one cloud attack or cloud security story that kind of jumps out to you that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I would like to jump into this topic. So I have really a cool story about some It was some IoT project. It was like several years ago. We worked on some company that basically have the front-end team and back-end team, the classic setup. And front-end team is more like the hardware team. So project about smart system that work on the warehouses. It basically system that use some sensors and a smart air conditioning system was in place. And it was, of course, it was a startup, and the company was a small, and team was a small, and the hardware team and the backend team. So we did everything fast. We started from scratch, and we hosted everything in Azure. And then we realized that we start receiving some security alerts, like for DDoS attack or scripting attack. First, we did think that it's something getting wrong. We checked our code on the backend side. No, everything is fine. Then we contacted our hardware team, so that they need to check some hardware is getting down or some sensors is not working properly. And after 1 week, our hardware team checked, and they said that they found some GSM mobile phone or smartphone, which was hidden somewhere near the building of the one warehouses that constantly sends and operates with SMS and sends data to the legacy sensors. And then they can have access to their whole infrastructure. So basically, the first our backend setup is actually blocks all the stuff. So they called police, of course. They started some investigation. And they, of course, but it was like a really hard time to understand and find this first vulnerability. So after this case, our management started really thinking and investing into the security, and we spent like 1 month to, and we received, of course, the budget. And in the beginning, of course, there are no budget for security, but after this case, they immediately found the budget. So that's the story of the.
It's weird how budget is always found like after the event, not before the event, right?
Exactly. And I have somewhere this photo of this device. It was the first smartphone. It was like 3 years ago, and this was like a smartphone that somebody used some fake SIM card and operates with SMS and a GSM network to somehow get data and do some DDoS attack scripting. They tried, but it's cool how Azure our default setup save our lives, and our gateways and firewalls and the cloud saves our lives. So actually, we tested all this infrastructure like accidentally. So we decided to give it a try and do some default security, and somehow it worked for us. Yeah.
Very cool. Did someone just join the smartphone into your data center?
No, they somehow put it in near the building somewhere, hide it, and they send data via Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. It was enough space. It was like 15 or 20 meters to the first sensor, and there are no any hardware firewalls inside the building and no gateways. So basically, they can just easily call to this and send SMS to the smartphone and send any data and receive any data. And so and we like see this alerts. It was like 3 days. They send in exactly the same sensors because they have an IP address inside, so they constantly block the same sensors, and it was like, from one hand funny, from another hand a little bit scary, because you see how it can be done.
I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued whether Boris's cloud attack story is going to involve an attack that Boris himself has orchestrated. Whether Jay's attack story is going to involve an attack that Jay himself has orchestrated, given that we know what he does for a job.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
That's very cool.
If we have time, I can share one attack story that we observed. So as I mentioned earlier, most of the attacks against Kubernetes infrastructure or container infrastructure in general, we saw were due to misconfigured control plane. Like in the past 2 years, 2-3 years, we saw one threat actor named by Team TNT. They have Team TNT has been one of the most active actor targeting container infrastructure, including Docker and Kubernetes. And their initial access are always through misconfigured control plane, such as expose and insecure Docker daemons, or in Kubernetes, they infect to expose API server or kubelet. And one of their malware that we identified early this year is that they infiltrate to misconfigure kubelet. So kubelet works like a Docker daemon in Kubernetes. Kubelet runs on every node in the Kubernetes cluster, and by default, it is not. By default, Kubelet accepts anonymous request, and when receiving a request, it translates the API request into operation in the containers and pods on that particular node. So the malware, we found that it infiltrates. Team TNT tried to compromise, try to gain initial access to and is insecurely exposed kubelet. And once gaining control of one node, they start to move laterally from that single compromised Kubernetes node to other nodes in the cluster. And eventually, it was able to gain control to the entire Kubernetes cluster. So that's one. That's again, these attacks are not super sophisticated, but they were able to identify the low-hanging fruit and very easily attack and gain controls to hundreds or even thousands of computation resources for free.
Awesome. I mean, not awesome, but kind of cool. if we have time, Blake, just on that point, kind of ties back to topic one, and like gives a really good example of that. You know, a lot of these attacks are not, you know, amazing 0 days. A lot of these attacks are not, you know, super sophisticated. They're taking advantage of some misconfigurations rather than vulnerabilities. And I think just going back to kind of traditional versus Kubernetes, yes, there are things you need in your pipeline to check you're deploying Kubernetes securely. But because Kubernetes, the way you set up a cluster, the way you define your kubelet is all very infrastructure as code compared to traditional IT environments, like the tools to actually protect you from deploying a Kubernetes cluster are open source and exist. We have one called Chekhov, for example. And I think it's, you know, yes, you still have to take security and work to put that in your pipeline, but I think just the visibility of those settings and being able to have them in infrastructure as code so you can kind of check them puts us in a much better security posture and gives people easy things they can do to kind of, you know, start to stem those misconfigs.
And yes, to Matt's point, I remember about 2-3 years ago when I tried to set up my first Kubernetes infrastructure from the scratch. It took me, I think, a week to have everything properly set up and communicate with each other. And it was very difficult. And what I did at that back time is essentially trying to open everything, like open all the ports on my master node and worker node, so that at least I can make sure they work. Then I start to, after my Kubernetes can start to work, then I start to lock down, and I'm sure that I missed something. And that's like Kubernetes itself is not easy to manage, but I mean, the good news is now there are managed Kubernetes service provided by cloud service providers such as AWS, Azure, and GCP. They all have managed Kubernetes service that they manage your control plane, and you only focus on the data plane. You only focus on deploying your application, and that makes securing Kubernetes much easier. Like they strip out, like I would say, more than 60% of the security works for ID admin.
Yeah, I had also some examples, which is in the security reports. On nowadays is popular attack on Kubernetes is fake container. So some basically most popular containers. So hackers, they create the fake container out of this one, and then when people going to use it from the Docker Hub, from another registry, they upload it as a part of your dependency, and then they try to access your control plane, or they try to open ports and sense data, and so on and so forth. So it's getting popular. So, for example, a lot of companies, they use their own secure registry with constantly scanning all containers to find these fake ones or some vulnerability inside.
Yeah.
Wow, those are all great stories, and I think it kind of, the ones I think of is like where you do all the tests and there's like other things that people come up with. Like one friend did this big deployment, they did all the security testing, but the one scenario they didn't basically account for was hackers using drones to hack in. And so sometimes, despite our well-intentioned efforts and everything going on, that hackers find a way, right? So, which leads kind of like one topic I want to make sure we cover today is, so cloud security is big, and also big is staying out of the front page news, right? With social media, if the company makes a mistake or a security breach, right, you're in that vicious news cycle, sometimes for just 24 hours, sometimes longer. So you would think there would be kind of more of a need for cloud security to be at the forefront of thought. But what's kind of also interesting is two other dynamics, right? You've got distributed teams working remotely, and everyone's kind of feeling this, I don't know what you would say, this urgency to basically move even faster, right? We've got to get basically our deployments, the cycles faster, and faster. And kind of like what you often see is startups popping up and everyone's moving so fast to deploy and releasing features. And then when you talk about cloud security, it's like, oh yeah, we'll get to that, right? It's like the thing that's kind of like at the end. And so it's like, it just kind of fascinates me. So it'd be great to kind of like hear your thoughts and insights around that.
I'm going to rant on about the importance of DevSecOps for my answer. So if anyone else wants to go first before that, that's absolutely fine.
No, you go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yes, DevSecOps for the win. There we go. Yeah, like this is an exact point. Like you wouldn't nowadays, like if we're moving faster and faster, you're going to have automation to deal with that. You're going to have, and I hate the phrase DevOps team, but you're going to have a team that's working in that DevOps methodology where together the operations and the developers take full responsibility right from the start of the project. So you're going to have CI/CD pipelines, developers are writing test, operations teams are writing CD deployment to kind of validate those environments and to automatically put those changes into production. Like just as you would never kind of try and do the whole DevOps methodology without writing unit or integration tests in your pipeline, we also shouldn't see security as something that like is a traditional security team. Beating the same drum, we do have the tools now to kind of programmatically assess the security posture of a Kubernetes cluster, assess the security posture of Terraform, assess the security posture of a container and whether there are any known CVEs within that container. And these should all be things that we consider just the same as our code tests and our integration tests. Like, they should be things that we can put into our pipeline, and it shouldn't be seen as a blocker. It should be done in a way that, so for example, I was working with some open source users the other day who were talking about how they've wrapped some tools. So they kind of take a baseline of a currently in production system, and the tools only then alert them to any new misconfigurations or any new CVEs that they are introducing, so that they win over the developers, so that the CI/CD pipeline doesn't go from having no security and no errors to having security options and 1,000 red X's in the pipeline. It plugs the dam. It stops you introducing new things past that point, but then they can slowly and surely go back and work on like a known sized security backlog, but without, annoying the first developer that happens to run the pipeline. So I think there are ways that we can start, zero friction adding security to pipelines, but it has to be like that. Like if you have a fully automated pipeline and you are still kind of going to a security team as like a manual step out of that pipeline before you deploy, then you're just not going to win that security game, and your development teams are going to start resenting the involvement, I think.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with you, Matt. So yeah, you need to even create additional pipelines only for a security option, or use the all patterns that can apply all this security patterns on your DevOps and your whole infra as well. So yeah, I agree with you.
That's kind of a cool idea, actually, having like extra pipelines that might be more noisy, but the output of those pipelines doesn't block the build. It just feeds that data to like a central security team or other people that can like help with that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's cool, Boris. I like that.
Yeah, we're using this approach actually for some project where we some applying some security updates or adding some vaults and sensitive data. So yeah.
Nice. Sorry, Jay, I think I cut you off there.
Oh, no worry. I was just saying, like, I constantly being amazed by the movement toward cloud, like how visualization makes deploying a data center so fast, so agile, and so scalable comparing to 10, 20 years ago. And with infrastructure as a code, or everything as a code, policy as a code, I feel that securing this infrastructure should be much easier, should be less, should be more friction free comparing to traditional environment. Now when everything's a code, you don't really need to run the traditional like Nmap or network scanning tool to identify the misconfiguration, because everything now can be written as code. You just just check the code and you can capture the misconfiguration as early as possible before going into the production. And again, fixing issues in earlier or in CA stage is much cheaper, faster than fixing issue in production.
Amen to that.
Yeah, great discussion. DevSecOps for the win. So we definitely there, and that kind of really segues nice into, with the shift or move to cloud, right? For some of the different things, a lot of people say, what are the unknown unknowns? What do I actually need to know, like when I'm doing this, right? When you look at kind of like even on the monitoring side, like 5 or 10 years ago, a common scenario, if something went wrong, right? The monitoring tools maybe not there. So you would be on a group call and everyone's like trying to figure out what went wrong, right? And then we'll get back to you like next week or next Monday or next Tuesday. But then in today's world, like waiting a week to figure something out is like pretty ridiculous, right? So for the people out there today, like watching it, executives or for some of the teams, what are some of these unknowns that the team should know about as they start to basically mature and evolve their cloud security efforts and operations at their companies?
I think this is where, like, I feel sorry for the smaller companies, right? Because as everyone's already said, security is big. So, you know, if it comes down to like a single security advocate on a team, or like it's a smaller company that doesn't have the budget because they haven't been hacked yet, so the budget hasn't been unlocked, you know, from the joke earlier, you know, to have like a dedicated set of security resources that are just thinking about security all day, like you're not even going to have someone that, and I don't remember any of these, which is why we have automation, but like you're not even going to have someone that remembers the AWS CIS guidelines, for example, let alone the Kubernetes CIS guidelines and the PCI DSS guidelines and the NIST guidelines for security, you know, and all of these kind of frameworks for checks and balances and making sure you're building secure deployments. So for me, I think it still goes back to tooling. Like there is tooling out there which, because cloud is API driven, you are in a position where you can have some automation or some tool run against your environment and tell you what is not like configured to a good secure baseline. That's no longer necessarily an expert that has to know which file to look on a Linux system or which IP tables rules to read. You know, you can literally have tools that go out and do that for you and kind of give you a positional report on your security posture. Embrace those, like, especially if you know you don't have security teams in place that are used to doing that, like embrace that tooling. Maybe get a third party in to help you understand which tools you kind of need in your pipeline. You can definitely do it with open source, but yeah, embrace those tools.
Yeah. Moreover, you can hire, if you don't have the team, you can hire additional company from outside, like they can help you with your security, or can invest in your current team. It depends on, of course, on the project and the budget size. But yeah, it's always like this. After a security breach, then management always finds this money. So it's always like that. So, and it can be dedicated resources, or it can be like, yeah, part of your team, development team, DevOps team, whatever. So it's in the startup is people anyway, everyone doing the all stuff, so it's fine. Of course, it's
Great. Anything on your side, Jay, or we pretty much echo change?
Yeah, pretty much agree. I think I feel the evolution of cloud, or the development of cloud, just moves so fast. Cloud service providers release a new features, new service almost every other week or month, and it's impossible to find one security professional that is an expert of one cloud service provider like AWS. Not to mention to find a person who is an expert of more than one cloud service provider, Azure, AWS. So there's just no way that human can catch up with this technology. And I think there are also different CIS benchmark for each cloud service providers. That's why I guess my point, that's why we need to automate this type of tedious things.
Great, and kind of like on the same track, one of the things you wanted to talk about today were the new Kubernetes vulnerabilities, Jay. So if you want to talk about those, and if anyone else has anything to chime in on.
Sure, I can share a story that a finding that Unit42 recently published a new vulnerability. One of our researchers found in managed container service Azure container instance in Azure environment. So Azure Container Instance ACI is similar to Fargate in AWS. So it manage the underlying control plane and allow developer to just run application, run a containers in that environment. And however, under the hood, Azure Container Instance is actually implemented using Kubernetes. So although you only, as a user, you only deploy a single container run in ACI, but under the hood, they use Kubernetes to allow multi-tenant, multiple user deploying their containers in this ACI. And what our researcher found is that first, sorry about my background noise, what our researcher found is that first, Azure doesn't use the latest version of RunC in that Kubernetes platform, meaning that this RunC vulnerability was first discovered back in 2020, and the RunC vulnerability allow a container breakout. So our researcher was able to break out from that from a container running in ACI environment and gain access to the host. However, this breakout itself is not considered a vulnerability in Microsoft's mindset, because they don't think in container world, Microsoft doesn't think that container itself is a security boundary. So they think host itself is a security boundary. As long as you cannot escape from a host, they don't think that's an issue. So our researcher works harder to find if there's any way they can escape from not just from the container, but also from the host to other hosts, meaning that from one node to another host in the underlying Kubernetes infrastructure. And after working very hard for a few weeks, he found another more like misconfigured headers that Microsoft used inside Kubernetes to communicate between the API server and the node. So essentially, secret key was leaking from HTTP request, and using that secret key, he was able to gain access to other nodes, meaning that he was able to break out from one node to another node and gain access to other users' containers and data in ACI. So that's one of the very, very cool vulnerability that our researcher found. However, I just want to emphasize, I still feel that using a managed container service is much more secure than create your own. I'm not saying that managed container or Kubernetes service are vulnerable. This is just one of the, very, very few vulnerabilities that were found in the past few years.
Great, thanks for that, Jay. Matt, Boris, anything to add to that? Or that it seems pretty like it covers everything, right?
Yeah, it covers everything. So.
Yeah, I'd mirror Jay on like the whole like get to Kubernetes, like consume Kubernetes if you can, especially if you're new to it. Don't roll your own. Like if you're not in the business of building Kubernetes as the product you're selling, like consuming cloud Kubernetes is definitely kind of the safer, more sane way to go about things.
Excellent. And one question to just kind of throw in there. So we get a lot of times on DZone Live is kind of the audiences that are looking to get into these careers, right? And so we typically kind of miss that. So for the people maybe in college or in high school, kind of like grade school, like that are coming up today, they say, hey, maybe someday I want to get into cloud or DevSecOps or Kubernetes, cloud native, et cetera. What are some of maybe some quick points, some things they should start doing today as they start to look they're doing a career around any of those?
I think from my point of view, they should know just the basics. I mean, it's like in the gym. So if you know how the base exercise works, then you can start working on this. So what I want to say is that start from knowing how the client side is working, how the servers is working, some basics software languages, and so on, and then only after this get into the and try some free cloud accounts. Also, Kubernetes basically is based on the dedicated architecture. So it's just a servers which is operated with one control flight servers. Basically, all nodes is a virtual machine or a physical machine as well. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the basics are the most boring part, right? And with all the tools you have now, you got the libraries. Why do you need to learn the basics, right? But once you know the basics, then you can be Neo from the Matrix, right? So that's what's really key there. And I think, Matt, you had something about goats and learning.
Yeah. So I was just gonna say, like, and by the way, like Jay, I was thinking when you were telling that story about your researcher, like, doesn't that just sound like the best job ever? Just like being able to come in every day and just think about how do I break into this cluster or how do I escape this container? Like that sounds awesome. My advice would be to play with things. There are so many resources out there for free now. Like cloud vendors will give you free credits for small instances of pretty much all of their products. Like there's never been a better time to be a college student or a university student who suddenly has access to all this free stuff. And one example I'm going to give is a project by a friend of Bridge Crew's called Kubernetes Goat. And this is a collection of purposely vulnerable Kubernetes deployments, Kubernetes server configuration, with a load of documentation that he's put a load of amazing work into to kind of guide you through how to abuse these security vulnerabilities to break this cluster. And it's just, it's free. There's a DEF CON talk around it. There's information on how they set up the labs to use it. So yeah, just really good free resources. And yeah, by all means, reach out to us on Twitter if you need any other kind of cloud security resources, because it's just a great time to be a security industry student, because everyone's trying to just push more and more information out.
Yeah, but still, in the security area, it's good to understand how things are working inside. So nowadays, that's a lot of information coming from a lot of sources, but what I found is based on technologies that's founded like 20, 30 years ago or 50 years ago. So it's always all the same, nothing changing, just a little bit more marketing.
I agree with Boris. It's all just layers of abstraction, but when those layers of abstraction break, you still need to know the stuff at the bottom of the stack.
Exactly.
Yeah, 100%.
And not only there are a lot of free resources online that you can learn, and I also feel the bar of entering, particularly cloud security, is much lower comparing to 10 years ago. Now everybody can open a free AWS account and start to have your own build and play around with your data center. Like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, most of the organizations still had physical data centers. And unless I knew the IT admin, then I could peek into what our data center actually look like. But nowadays, you can literally just build your own data centers in a few minutes. Just get
Hands up who had a rack of really old, crappy equipment that they'd begged, borrowed, and stolen from like old employers, and like to try and build something to practice on.
Right, exactly. It was not easy to get hand-on experience at that time, but now you can. Everybody can.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, it's like in the past, like we didn't get experience until we got into the workforce or had a job where we needed to do that. And now, like, people can start to explore before they ever even hit that sort of corporate job force and workforce and all that stuff. One thing to kind of wrap it up before we turn it over to Q&As that I want to know from everyone here, is there anything, like for Matt, exciting going on at Bridge Crew you want to spike out? Will you be doing any other appearances that our audience should know about? Will you be at KubeCon? What are some of the cool, exciting things that you want to say? And then the same for you, Jay, with Palo Alto, and the same for you, Boris, with Nordcloud.
I absolutely wish I was going to be at KubeCon. Sadly, the US is not opening up for UK citizens until the start of November, so I'm going to miss out on that. So good. Yeah, we're doing some really cool stuff at the moment with drift detection. So kind of, how do I know that, like, okay, I've got some security tools in my pipeline, and Bridge Crew can automate that, and you can do that whole stemming the flow where you've got a pull request and it's annotating, hey, you don't want to merge this pull request. We found these misconfigurations in Kubernetes or Terraform. But then if I do deploy that successfully and fix those issues, and then someone manually goes into my AWS or my Azure runtime environment and goes and changes something maybe at 3 a.m. when like there's a problem and someone goes and makes a manual change, how do I detect the difference between the infrastructure as code that was deployed and what's actually in runtime? So we have tools to kind of collect data from both runtime and code and kind of bring those together and alert on any of those drifts. So that's pretty cool. And we have a blog on that as well at bridgecrew.io/blog. So check that out.
Yeah, we also have some several security initiatives that we're going to onboard some pipelines, which is now based on not only on Terraform, but now it's Pulumi getting popular. So we're now also moving our landing zones and security landing zone to the Pulumi. Also, we have a different approaches. So yeah, so this is what we are going to introduce in the next, and also for our customers as well. So yeah, it will be the case and topic.
And for me, I just want to say that if you are interested in security, Prisma, Palo Alto Networks, keep all the security-related research in the website unit42.paloaltonetworks.com. Just visit that website and you can see the latest security research that we are doing. And yeah.
Excellent. So we still are kind of in that pandemic world of virtual, hybrid, trade shows, in person. What can we get to? What can we not get to? So hopefully a year from now, we're not basically saying the same stories, right? So, but man, that's a lot of exciting work that's going over on Bridge Crew, Nordcloud, and Palo Alto Networks. We'll hit the brakes here for our Q&A portion of this. Just take like 1 or 2 questions if we get any. Everyone's a little bit shy today. That's cool. So it is Q&A time. What are your cloud security questions? If you got feedback on the episode, you want to give Jay some stuff that he should decorate with his shelves. Really throw anything at us. If you got some feedback, some questions, this is the time to do it. Don't be shy or just have any sort of comment. So if you're out there watching us now, throw us the question. Or if you miss us, right? So you're on a treadmill like 3 hours from now working out, you're listening to our episode, get on to Twitter. Me and Matt are out there. You can get on DZone, and we shared Matt's out there. So you can let us know after the fact as well. We'll definitely be able to check that out. But I'm not seeing any questions come through today, so we're just hitting a little bit more but we'll give one more thing. I don't know. Let's see. I guess what we'll then do, with it just being a little bit more quiet, we'll end it on like one question. And really thanks for everybody taking time out of a busy Thursday to do this. Almost into October, and once we get to October, all the holiday music's going to start and all that great stuff. So you wonder where the year went, and we'll be talking 2022. But I'll say, like, I'll go around the panel and we'll end on this. Name like one really big mistake that you see companies doing in cloud security that just drives you absolutely crazy.
Okay, one big mistake is not thinking about security at all. So that's the biggest mistake I saw. But sometimes that for example, startups, they of course not thinking about security in the first place because they lack of resources and so on. But still, they need to plan this in advance, at least. And yeah. And this is the main reason that they moving this topic into the end, and then it's something happening.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's the main mistake from my point of view.
Great. And then Matt and Jake.
I can go first.
Yeah, I'll let Jay go first because there's a PA announcement happening here.
Yeah. So one of the biggest issue that we saw in the real cloud environment is the inappropriate or insufficient logging. So as Matt mentioned earlier, the cloud is really API driven. So everything you do and everything happen in the cloud environment happen like between a set of using a set of API calls, and all cloud service provider have a really good logging mechanisms for every cloud service, such as S3 bucket. You can turn on the logging feature of S3 bucket to see who access what files at what time. And or for your database service, you can see what queries are made to this RDS database at what time and what was the load. So turning on logging will incur a little bit cost, but without logging, you really cannot debug or identify when issue happen. Not to mention security happen when a security issue happen if someone unauthenticated user access data in your S3 bucket. You have to know what data were leaked, what data were accessed, and who accessed that data, like what access key were used to access access your data. So logging is super important, although it costs a little bit. But like to Boris' story earlier, if you don't spend a little bit now, you may need to spend more when bad things really happen to you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And to mirror kind of Boris and Jay's comments there, like I think because cloud security is such a big and potentially complex problem, people use that as an excuse not to do anything. I think like there are things you can do in like less than a day to catch low-hanging fruit and massively improve your security posture. So I would say just do those little bits. Even if you haven't solved all the really complex like edge cases, doing a bit of something is better than using it as an excuse to do nothing at all.
Yeah, I have a last story, just last one. A story not about the fail of security and how we set up everything regarding security properly. So basically it was the firewall that did everything. So we created the firewall in the cloud. We set up rules. We spent a lot of time on it. And then in one day, this firewall completely blocks all our production, including front-end and back-end. So it works quite well in blocking. So it blocks everything. So we have to spend a lot of time to just unblock our IPs and webs and backends addresses and ports. So
you were too secure.
Yeah, too secure. It's like it was complete fail. Yeah. So
I'm always doing whatever it is supposed to do. Blocking.
Yeah.
That's the beautiful thing in this profession and line of work. There's never a dull moment, right? It's almost like too airy. If everything's going too well, you're just like waiting, looking over the back of your shoulder. So, coming up with solutions and sort of being MacGyvers. It's like everybody's got to be like on their feet. There's never going to be a dull moment in technology, right? There's going to be something breaking or something going on. So that's kind of ability to be adapt is so key to this role, and ability to invest early, not after something bad happens, right? So really huge shout out to Matt Johnson from Bridge Crew today for joining us. DevSecOps for the win, right?
For the win.
Yes.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been awesome.
If you see somebody like at a trade show or a virtual event with a T-shirt that says DevSecOps for the win, there's a 99% chance that's Matt, right?
It will be now. I'm on the T-shirt website as we speak.
He's got it copyrighted, so everybody else already knows. Don't even do it. Nice. And huge thanks to you, Jay. It's great having your expertise as well on here from Palo Alto Networks. Be on the lookout for Jay. Connect with him on LinkedIn. Check all that stuff out. And then Boris over at Nordcloud, an IBM company, or you just call it Nordcloud. And they've got a lot of great stuff. You can follow Boris on LinkedIn, and I'm not sure what all big social media networks are big there, but I'm guessing you're probably not on TikTok, so we'll just go with LinkedIn. But yeah, so many amazing stories. And what I love with the panel today is like oftentimes you hear about these really sunny stories, how everything went great. Nothing at all went wrong with some big, huge deployment. It's like everything was just perfect. We've all been to those user conferences, places like that. And so it's going to get good to get some actual color here today, like some world challenges and things like that, because typically we don't get to hear from those. So really thanks for shining a light on those, talking about like some of the people coming up. So, you'll be on the street in London or somewhere, and 20 years from now, some kid will go, "Hey, Matt, I remember like I was 12 years old and all of a sudden I was watching this like thing on YouTube or Twitter, and it's like, hey, I learned how to do everything. And so I got into Kubernetes from watching you on Twitter. So you never know. So life is crazy like that. But huge thanks to everyone here. And that will wrap up our cloud security episode of DZone. We're so happy to have our panel here today, and we're so happy to have this audience. So wherever you're discovering this video, for hours from now or days or weeks, it's definitely just an amazing episode, real world stories, none of that usual stuff, and none of us saying like just shift left and all your problems are solved, right? So really fun time today, and wishing everybody a great rest of their Thursday, and have a great weekend. So thanks again, Matt, Jay, and Boris. And we'll see you next time for DZone Live. And for some of the people going out to KubeCon, we will be doing an after party on October 13th, that Wednesday night at Grand Central Market. And we will be having an after party. So we'll be doing some karaoke after that. So come over and join us either for food or come and hang out later, get some Bruno Mars duets in, or Winger, Motley Crue, whatever your jam is. It'll be a lot of fun at KubeCon, so don't just sit around and look for vulnerabilities unless you're looking at the GOAT thing off GitHub that Matt shared. But until next time, thanks everybody.
Thanks for having us. Cheers, bye.